Welcome to another episode of Sludge Underground. My name is Nasip Izwane, your host, and firstly I'd like to just remind you to check out our episode with Future Radio. Marcel was on that one last week and it was an incredible episode, and as always, if you enjoy the episodes, be sure to head out to Apple Podcasts to leave us a review and obviously leave us a rating on Spotify. Now this week's guest is another special guest, which is always the case on Sludge Underground, literally. We've got entertainment publicist, show producer, strategist, brand and media profiler and owner of the CoLab Network, Miss Collett Dawson. Miss Collett Dawson, how's everything going?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our chat.
Hey, the pleasure is all mine. So one of the things that I never mentioned in the beginning there is that you're a sports lover and that you're also very well traveled. So how many places have you actually been to around the world?
Oh, goodness. I must actually count the cities, but I've been to 5 of the 6 continents. So I love it. So my first international trip was when I was 18. I went to Australia and I just caught the travel bug. I just love it. For me, just seeing yourself immersed in other cultures and foods and all that kind of thing, it just stretches your mind, and it's just the absolute best thing that I feel I can do. It's like good food for my soul, I just absolutely love it. Obviously, during COVID, it was the hardest thing having to deal with is not being able to travel. So thankfully that has now changed as well.
Of the countries that you've been to, give me your top 3, like the 3 places where you had the best time.
Well, obviously my favorite city is London. I think obviously because I lived there for 2 years and it's where I started my career in the entertainment industry. So that's where my soul is happiest. Another city that I fell in love with was Jerusalem when I was in Israel. While I was living overseas for 2 years, I did the whole, working on a kibbutz in Israel, and we went and visited Jerusalem, and that was absolutely beautiful. I'm going to have to say 4 cities because then the city that took me most by surprise, I think, was Istanbul. I went over to actually for a business meeting and just fell in love with the city, just the history, the architecture, all that kind of thing. And then making up the rear is definitely, obviously, New York. Because of Broadway mostly.
I'm extremely jealous, Collett. I mean, the listeners know I always mention in the episodes that the furthest place I've been to is Johannesburg, so I'm extremely jealous.
Well, next time you're coming with me, it's just, it just, as I say, it broadens the mind and it's good food for the soul.
Yeah, no, and you paint a really good picture about, the vibes, when it comes to these places that you mentioned. So you did a really good job with that one. And considering that you mentioned as well that you stayed in London back in the day, how was London, back in the day compared to when you go there now? I obviously say this as well because I'm a huge Chelsea fan, yes. And you specifically stayed out in the western parts of London. Yes. So how was that experience?
I mean, it's obviously, the world has changed in the last 30 years, but when I was there, I was 21 years old. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. My soccer team of choice was Manchester United. So, sorry for that.
Oh gosh, let's stop this podcast right now.
But my biggest sport I actually love is Formula One. So while I was living there, I actually managed to go to 3 Formula One Grand Prix, which was, for me, was just absolutely incredible. So obviously there I entered the industry at that stage, but still now going back, I've still got all those relationships. I try and see as much as I can. When I lived there for the 2 years, so I saw a Charity Shield match between Manchester United and Liverpool. I mean, at Wembley. I mean, how awesome was that? I went to Wimbledon. I saw Wimbledon. I went to the Formula Ones and all that kind of stuff. Major concerts. I saw Michael Jackson in concert. I saw George Michael in concert. Those kinds of things. And for me, that was important while you're there to actually experience as much as you can. Just like soak up everything that we can't have here.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned F1 there because, as much as I know a bit about soccer, but F1 I know nothing about. And I think this is a great opportunity for me to sort of, dig deeper into that there before we touch on why it is, that you moved to England at such a young age as well. What happened there with Lewis Hamilton, it obviously has happened a while back now, but dive into the logistics of that. What actually happened? How was Lewis Hamilton cheated? Because I know there was this whole scandal around that, right?
So obviously, Lewis is a man you either love or hate, and I love him to bits. He's my favorite, so I get a lot of flack. So basically, it was Abu Dhabi. It was the last race of the season last year, and obviously different. If you're a Max Verstappen fan, you'll have a completely different take on it. But it was all down to the last race, who was going to win the championship. And it was the last few laps, and the race director just completely misinterpreted the rules. I won't make it more controversial than that. And literally Lewis lost out. So it was hugely controversial for us, especially being Hamilton fans. But I mean, it also meant that the excitement of the season last year went right down to the wire, and it was incredibly exciting. For you being a layman, what I would suggest is go and watch the season on Netflix called Drive to Survive. It is incredible. And that is a perfect introduction into Formula One. And you get to see, for me, it's not just about the racing around the track going really fast. It's the strategy behind it. And I'm being a strategist myself, it's seeing how they use their strategy to win or lose, to lose a race. So yeah, it was hugely controversial, but it just makes for very exciting racing this year. So at least we'll see what happens this year.
The Formula One actually sounds like something I'd actually enjoy. So thank you for that. I'll definitely check out the Netflix documentary that you mentioned. I think we need to also talk a bit more about F1 on the side as well. But looking back at you're 19 years old, you move out to England. Were you initially from South Africa and then you moved to London? And if so, why did you move to London?
So, I mean, it was definitely a bit of a right place, right time kind of scenario. And for me, it was just grabbing the opportunities while they were there. So back in South Africa, so I'm South African born. My heritage is British, though. My grandparents are British, were British. Were English and Scottish. So I always had this desire to go and discover my roots, as it were. I was very close to my paternal grandfather, my father's father. And I mean, he instilled the fact is you can be South African, but still appreciate your roots, So I initially started in South Africa in the hotel trade, believe it or not. But then when I was 21, I decided to take a break. I took 3 months off. We were able to take a 3-month sabbatical from the hotel where I was working. And I decided I was going to go and discover my roots, basically. Got on a plane with no plans. It was my second international trip only ever on my own, you can imagine. And this is the dark days of it was 1991, so still dark days in our history. But I decided this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tour around for 3 months. And it was a funny feeling. As I was circling around Heathrow and landed, I felt like my soul was coming home. It was a very surreal experience for me. The 3 months became 6 months. I just didn't want to go home. I mean, I was 21 years old, what can you do? And I toured around Europe. I did Kontiki tours, which were absolutely wonderful. As I said, I went to Israel and I worked in a kibbutz for 2 years, which was magical. And then I had to come back to London and I had nothing left. I mean, I'd spent every single cent and I was like, okay, either I stay and find a job or I go home. And I thought, I'm not being defeated. I'm going to stay. Let's see what happens. And at that time, South Africans could only get part-time work. So that would be au pair or bar work, like the menial kind of things. And I thought, what the hell, why not? And I took a job as an au pair to looking after this girl, lovely, lovely family. And it was just, as I say, right place, right time. I had no plans to stay. For me, in the back of my mind, I was going to work for about 2-3 months, raise enough money, and then obviously continue traveling. And then it was literally the most incredible family that I worked for. As it turns out, the father was an entertainment lawyer for a group called the Nederlander International. So they were a huge theatre company based in New York, but they were extending into London. And it was just incredible. And I found myself, I'd been working for them for about 2 months. I had all the spare time on my hand. I mean, they had one daughter. She was 11. She was at school all day. I was doing nothing. I was so bored. So I said to him, I've got the time, use me. And he said, well, coming to London, let me show you what I do, And the theatre that is now known as the Dominion Theatre, which is beautiful, beautiful theatre in the West End, was a derelict movie house at that stage. And they'd bought it and they were rebuilding it into a theatre. So that was the project of actually working on this project, creating this theatre. And I'll never forget the day. I mean, it was 24th of March and I walked into that venue and I was like, this is me. It was like, it was calling, And then I stayed for the next 2 years. Can you believe it? I just didn't want to leave. And Jerry, who's now the CEO of Nederlander International, was just incredible. He brought me in. I was like a sponge. I just learned. I sat by his side. I mean, I was gopher. I was running and fetching coffee and, filing. I mean, nothing major. But him seeing my thirst for knowledge, he just literally let me sit in. I sat in on negotiations. I sat in on meetings and I just absorbed all this information. And then I worked on huge projects. We did opening nights for shows like Grand Hotel, Beauty and the Beast, Greece, all these incredible shows that we'd only ever heard of in South Africa. I mean, obviously, we were still under a huge equity ban at that stage because of apartheid and that. And so I was just like absorbed into this incredible thing. And I knew that this was it for me. And then obviously my time is expiring because we were only allowed to be in the country for so long. And I mean, I literally got on the plane coming home to South Africa, sobbing my heart out because, I mean, obviously I didn't want to come home. And then I tried to go back into hotels while I was here, and I just realized, you know what? Entertainment was my calling. I had all this knowledge. And then I approached a local theatre impresario, Richard Loring. He was running a dinner theatre in Midrand. At the time, it was called Halfway House. It was in the middle of absolute nowhere. And I went, and he offered me a job on the spot. And I literally then just worked my way up there from front of house to food and beverage. And then they realized that I had a knack for customer service and for publicity. And then they took me in, continued my training. And I mean, I suppose the rest, as you can say, is history. I just never looked back. I mean, entertainment was in my blood. And I just knew it. I mean, I love my time in the hotels, and I still have hankerings every now and again, thinking, but, that was my calling, just when you know that you were created to do something specific. And I mean, that's 30. I mean, so March this year, I celebrated 30 years since that started. So it's crazy.
A huge congratulations to you, Collett, for celebrating 30 years. I think one of the most important things, probably the most important thing, when it comes to someone's journey is consistency. And we can see that for you, that is something that you very much, possess. A very consistent person who's been doing this for a very long time, and no one can actually take that away from you. We know that, the love for theatre is rooted in England. That's where it all began. And then, you started, that started unfolding here in South Africa as well. What I want to know is, we've obviously had one of your artists here on the show in Wangi Archie, and you deal a lot with, artists in the music industry as well. So how did you sort of get introduced to the music industry in South Africa?
Well, it was about going back about 15 years. I was at the soundstage, and I mean, I was loving my time there. I was promoting their shows, but I felt like I had more to give the industry. And I know that some people might say, oh, well, that's quite arrogant, but I really felt that I could do more. And I've always had a love of the industry as a whole, and I felt like, as much as I love theatre, and obviously that had been my background up to that stage, there was more that I could do. And, and it was actually at the time there was, and especially I kept the relationships going with the artists that were obviously on stage. And I realized even then, I mean, it was 15 years ago, the idea for the CoLab Network was born, I think, because I realized is that our industry is so small here, which is different obviously from New York and West End, which is where I got my training. But we have to diversify, we have to multitask, all that kind of thing. And I was like, what happens if we could cross-pollinate clients? And that's when I started having that idea. So I thought, I mean, it was a very hard decision. I left the soundstage and then started my own. Then I went, I became a freelance consultant, which was very scary. But I realized that I also had a knack for that, for promoting artists and things like that. What had happened while I was at the soundstage was a very good friend of mine in the UK. His name is Richard Saxel, an incredible concert pianist, a classical concert pianist. He said to me while I was there, he says, Collett, I want to come back to South Africa, put a tour together, and I want to do it. And I was like, blasé, when you're young and that kind of thing. And I was like, not a problem. And I literally, again, found another speciality that I was good at, in the sense of taking an artist, and it wasn't even just promoting, obviously, shows and that now, but putting a tour together. So I realized I could be a tour promoter. I mean, we booked him in Joburg. I mean, he performed in Joburg, Cape Town, PE. I mean, this unknown concert pianist, and had sold out shows. And I realized, oh, this is something I can do. And I loved it.
Incredible.
That whole, that creation from starting of the tour, and then thinking, okay, this is what I can do. So when I went freelance, I realized, let me look into that. And I picked up, obviously, clients straight away of people that I'd been working with at theatre. They realized that I'd gone freelance. And then it literally just took a life of its own. So I went into music promotion. I went into organizing concert tours, et cetera, and then how movies came about as well, because I also work in the film industry, is that one of my close personal friends now did all the videography, at the soundstage, and he was looking for a publicist for his movies. He was a local movie producer and editor. So I started promoting movies, and suddenly I realized I can actually specialize across the spectrum.
Incredible.
And that for me was just so much more validating. I love the challenge. And then I realized that you can also cross-pollinate your clients, and that's how the CoLab Network came up, which I launched, my production company I launched 9 years ago. You, for example, use the skills of one of your clients for the benefit of one of your other clients, and keep it almost like in the family kind of vibe. And so that's how that came about. So it was literally almost as if, as if it was, I'm traveling this predestined path, but I do believe it's just taking opportunities when they present itself. And I've always had a very good gut instinct of what can work, what can't work. Obviously you make mistakes along the way, because it's a very tough industry to be in, but, trusting that instinct of trying that. It was very scary, those first few concert tours that I put together, it's just like, am I right for this, and then realizing that you can do it, and also movies and things like that, so now I work in all those spectrums, and even the last few years have added in a bit of lifestyle things, for example, like launching restaurants and book launches and things like that, because it's all within the same spectrum. As I said earlier, our media have to cross-pollinate themselves as well. We don't have dedicated theatre reviewers and movie reviewers and that like they do internationally. So in South Africa, it's learning also to work within the setup that we've got and the infrastructure. And our media cover everything. I feel for them. So it was all about establishing the relationship. So the media also enjoy promoting what I said, because they don't only have one specific thing that I promote. For example, like you've got on Bongi Archie, and then the next time it would be a film premiere, things like that. So it's just keeping those relationships alive. And the huge important thing about longevity in the industry is establishing strong relationships within the industry and cultivating them and looking after them. A big part of what I do, it's all relationship driven. It's been 30 years. Hopefully it's a few more years down the line. I'll still be able to.
No, that is very incredible, Collett. You're dropping, some gems right there. Obviously you mentioned consistency. You're speaking about cross-pollination. You're speaking about maintaining relationships. It's really things that anyone could actually pick up and maybe apply in any industry that they're doing. But now focusing specifically on anyone who might be aspiring to become, a publicist and maybe even a strategist as well. What does that sort of entail in layperson's terms? What does a publicist do and what does a strategist actually do?
So publicist is a very, I always giggle at especially the youngsters coming up, because they see the glitz and the glamour. They see that I know all these celebrities and all these wonderful, these famous people at events and things like that. But it's like a 0.01% of the job is the glitz and the glamour. And it's all the hard work that you obviously have to put in behind the scenes. So what a publicist does is basically takes a product. So a product would be, for example, a theatre show. An artist will have an album release or a single release, like a film premiere or whatever. So that's the product. And it's your job to actually go out and create public awareness about it. So what it would entail is speaking to the media, sending out releases to the media saying, this is what's happening. Would you like interviews? So it's creating interviews and awareness, obviously, to get media coverage. So every time you read an article in a newspaper or you see it online, that's as a result of a publicist speaking to the journalist, setting up an interview with an artist, and then taking it a step further. It's not just about that. When it's a theatre show, it's like you need to encourage people to go and book tickets to go and see that show. That is your role, So it's not just about the wonderful article and, look here, here's, this famous celebrity getting coverage. It's, will that person then go out and go online and book a ticket to see the show or the concert or download the single or the album and all that kind of thing. So it's very pressurized, and a lot of the work what makes it so tough, it's very intangible. So you can't present to a client, a client sees at the end, here's the article. They don't see the 20 hours it took to get that article. Or for example, if a journalist says, sorry, it's not for us, that's, so it's hard. It's, very hard, thankless work at a lot of the time, and especially it's never a guarantee that it's going to get anything out of it. But basically that is what a publicist does, and that's the role. For a strategist, that's again, it goes back to just managing to see big picture. And I definitely learned that in the UK. I'm forever grateful for the knowledge that I learned over there. And I'm thrilled also that I could take that knowledge and apply it to the South African industry, so that the South African industry benefits from my experience. And a strategist is literally sitting with somebody who has an incredible talent but doesn't know what to do with it, for example. I mean, that's as layman's terms as I can get it. So here's an artist, he wants to release a single, he wants to release an album or whatever. The role that I play is I sit down, with you as an artist and say, okay, we've got to look at the genre of the song. How do we pitch it? Who do we pitch it to? When do we pitch it, for example? You don't want to come up against, so now we'll use, obviously, look how incredible Black Coffee is achieving, for example. So you don't want to release your single the same day Black Coffee is going to release a single, for example. So it's planning all of those kinds of things. And then often it's also then the long-term strategy of an artist will come to me and say, this is where I want to be in 5 years. Help me get there. So it's planning, when do you do this? When do you do a show? When do you do your concert tour, et cetera, et cetera. And that's definitely an area in South Africa where talent doesn't get support, unfortunately. It's not something that they learn, I always say, go study, go to a performing arts school or whatever. But those kinds of skills, unfortunately, they're not being taught at that level. So that's why somebody like me can come in and say, okay, you've got this talent. Let me show you how to maximize it. Because so often, and it's a big frustration for me, is we have so much talent in South Africa and it just falls by the wayside because they honestly don't know how to use it or where to pitch it, for example. So a lot more of my time at the moment, especially the turmoil of COVID, has been sitting with artists and saying, okay, you've got this talent. Is the song that you're recording, is it right for your genre? Is it right for your voice? What's next? You need to go perform it live, etc., etc. So that's basically what a strategist does.
That is very well said, Collett. And it brings me to the question of, obviously you are a special case, with all the experience that you've had, on the hands-on experience that is, and how long you've been going, having also had experience out in London and such. You're a very special case. But now looking at someone who's maybe aspiring to become a PR or a publicist, or maybe a strategist, which would you say is sort of the best route or approach? Would you say they should go and study to become a publicist or strategist, or would you say maybe the best experience would be for them to get some hands-on sort of experience? I asked this question as well because of something that was said by another publicist that we've had on the show, Melody Ramji, who literally said that these days, because of social media, anyone could literally run their own sort of PR type rig. Obviously I don't know how practical that would be, but looking at what Melanie has said and just looking at your experience, if you had to give someone advice, would you say it's better for them to maybe study, get hands-on experience, or maybe utilize social media to try run their own sort of PR thing?
Well, actually, I know Melanie really well as well, and she's incredible. I do agree with her in the sense of, I did both. Obviously, I started with hands-on experience, but it was way before social media. We didn't even have cell phones. I know a younger generation won't even understand that concept. So obviously, we had to hit the ground running, kind of, for example. We had no such thing as emails and things like that. But in this day and age, definitely, social media is a huge component of publicity, and it's definitely something that you can do yourself. I would suggest, if you can, try and do a digital marketing course just to get that basic knowledge, but obviously from a publicist perspective, some of us that are old school, obviously I do way more than just social media. But you can, there are artists. Look at Loyisu, for example. He's just performed at David Beckham's son's wedding, and he exploded because he put his videos on TikTok, So there are ways. Obviously he's a 1% of hundreds of thousands of artists that are doing it. So not everybody achieves that, but you can, and for me, definitely the hands-on experience was far more valuable than studying. So I went, a few years after I came back to South Africa, I went and did a PR course, just for those clients who want a qualification. And I found that 95% of the stuff that I was doing, I was already doing, So if you find the right mentor, and that's the thing, is like, you've got to find the right mentor, absolutely. But for me, studying is never wasted. So if you've got the capacity, if you've got the finance, absolutely. But you don't have to go and do a 3-year degree at a top university, There are definitely incredible workshops online, and go and do your research there. So do some Googling online. And especially now, the one good thing that's come out of COVID is that international courses have now become available. And I realize our industry is way different to the international market. But again, the core skills you can learn from that. From an artist perspective, definitely if you can go to performing arts school or a lot of them doing, I work with one called State Director School of Performing Arts. They have incredible different levels, where you can do full-time, you can do part-time, you can learn certain skills and learn those skills, the business skills. I think that is more important than anything else, is try and go online and find workshops. And I do lots of workshops as well of how to run your career as a business. Artists aren't learning of what your materials you need as to be a credible artist. How to, I also do lots of, for example, interview training. Artists aren't learning how to answer interviews. So I think it's a bit of both. But if you definitely, from a publicity perspective, start at a digital marketing course, but bearing in mind is that not everything is social media driven. You still need your traditional media and all that kind of stuff. But it's definitely a good place to start.
Very well said there, Collett. Now, looking at the CoLab Network, you must be at a point now where you're getting, dozens of submissions, artists coming through and some, listen, I'm an artist. This is the idea I have. May you please assist me in some way. Are you now at a point where you have to be picky, with the kind of artists that you actually work with? What are the logistics behind that there?
That's a complicated question to answer, because the one thing that I feel is important, and I always wanted to maintain it, was being as fluid as possible and as flexible as possible. And that's why when people contact me, I'm very grateful to be at a place where I don't have to go out and find work. People come to me, whether they know me by reputation, whether they've worked with me on, and that's where I go back to about the cross-pollinating. There might be, for example, Bongi was an artist that I've been working with on theatre shows for the last 10 years. And then he said to me, come, let's actually take my career a step further. So it's those kinds of relationships. It's also referrals, but I look at every single approach on a case-on-case basis. Is it something that speaks to me? So, for example, if it's an artist that comes to me and said, I've got a new single, I can't, I'm vouching for the artist by my reputation. So it's got to be of a certain standard, and if it's not, sometimes I can help them to get to that standard, which I'm happy to do, or you're not the right genre or whatever. But I definitely take it on a case-on-case basis, whether it's an artist, whether it's a show or a movie. My passion is music, and my hugest focus, and there's young talent. So I'm definitely have established myself as a developer of young talent, and I'm passionate about it. So if a young artist comes to me, I want to help them, I want to nurture them and grow and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely look at it and say, okay, how can I help you? And I always have a few of my projects where I sit down and I develop an artist each year. I make a commitment that I will develop X number of artists, because again, as it goes back to the fact is, there's this talent, but what do they do with it? So thankfully, I am usually approached by clients, and then I literally say yes or no. I also limit myself to how many projects at a time, purely because, yes, I could say yes to everything, but I feel like they've got to have personalized service. People want to sit with me. They don't want to sit with somebody else, that I'm mentoring. They want to sit with me and all that kind of thing. It doesn't help if my clients are competing with each other for coverage, so it's very hard to say no. But I've had to learn that, because it's to the benefit of the clients that I'm looking after. I can only do a certain number of projects at a time.
That is very informative. Thank you so much for that, Collett. Before we find out what the plans are for the rest of the year, I'd like to just, for you to tell us a bit more about a production that is very dear to you, obviously Gone Too Soon, where you pay tribute to fallen artists or artists that have passed away. What inspired you to actually get that going?
So what we haven't touched on, when I established the CoLab Network, it was also the case of being a production company. I'd learned from the best internationally and locally, and then I felt like I can now start, I can start producing my own shows. So to date, I've produced 17 shows since we started. My most successful one was a show called Always and Forever, a tribute to Luther Vandross, which was absolutely incredible. I mean, Timothy Malloy is phenomenal. So the publicity is my bread and butter, but my passion is to create. Gone Too Soon was a very personal project for me. Obviously, I'm hugely driven by music, and my two favorite artists were Freddie Mercury and George Michael. Obviously, it's my generation. I'm giving away my age, I know. And then obviously there's just so many deaths. But what actually happened was I was very close. I had two very close friends. I were very much in the public eye. Was Gugu Zulu, the South African motorsport champion. And the first one was Matthew Stewartson, who was a huge huge artist as well. Like, both of them died way before their time. And they were very close. They were very much the reason why I established the CoLab Network. They had been my support and my inspiration and pushed me out of my comfort zone, actually. So without the CoLab Network, without them, I wouldn't have had a CoLab Network. And I'd always made a commitment to myself that I would honor them the best way that I could. But it was on the back burner, and all that kind of thing. And I was producing a show called Simply Divas at this Joburg Theatre. So it was all the female divas of song. And it was actually 4 weeks after Gugu had died. So it was very fresh. And I saw how people responded to the Amy Winehouse segment. And one of the guests said, "Oh, she died, she's gone too soon." And I was like, that's a show. And it literally, from that moment, it germinated. And then it took me about 3 years to get it up and running. For me, it was obviously a personal tribute to the two people who were instrumental in establishing me as the CoLab Network. But from a public and an industry perspective, it was paying tribute to all those greats. So obviously we also had a South African segment, Mendoza, which was incredible. But it was your Elvises, your Michael Jacksons, George Michael, Freddie Mercury. The first time I staged it was in the end of 2018, and the public responded as well. And again, I used my passion for the youth. So my frontline vocalist was Timothy Malloy, Joseph Clark, who everybody knows as the South African Freddie Mercury, and Marishan, from Jamali fame. It was backed up by the Johannesburg Youth Orchestra, so this incredible young youth orchestra. And then I had 7 backing vocalists also from Stageworks Performing Arts School. So also young teenagers and 20-somethings as a backup. So it was, again, culminating in all my passions and bringing all incredible things together. So, so that's a huge passion project that I did. And then obviously COVID shut everything down, but hopefully we'll start producing again soon.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that, COVID, came through and it affected a lot of people. I'm just glad that, amongst all the noise and everything that, COVID came with, you were able to adapt, and go more the online routes, because you'll find that, there were some companies that just drowned, they no longer sort of, exist as a result of COVID, but here you are, still pushing. So looking at the plans, for the rest of 2022, could we maybe expect, Gone Too Soon to maybe make a comeback? Besides that, what are the plans?
I would love for Gone Too Soon to come back. Our biggest problem at the moment is the public gathering restrictions. Unfortunately, theatre are governed by the 50% capacity, which isn't changing anytime soon. And that's a major, major problem for us as producers. And it's a huge frustration when you see what can be done outside, and nightclubs are certainly not obeying those rules and things like that. So that's our biggest delay at the moment, is we need that to be lifted urgently. So the minute that is hopefully lifted this year, we're definitely looking at, I am in conversations with a number of artists. Gone Too Soon was a huge scale production, which I think might be a little bit too ambitious at this stage. I had over 100 artists on the stage, you can imagine. But we are definitely looking at smaller versions of almost like a cabaret style tributes. So I love my tributes. So we are definitely having conversations with that. Another drawback at the moment is also audience hesitancy. They are still very slow to return to theatres and to concert venues. I think our biggest, the beauty of the whole Netflix and chill thing in COVID, which was wonderful, is now shooting us in the foot, because it's a lot easier for people to sit on the couch and watch something on Netflix than get up, go to a theatre or go to a concert venue and see a show or see a concert in that. So it's also hoping that the public actually get behind and support us, which is very important. I was in London in February now, and it was wonderful to see how the public are back and they're supporting, and they realize that we need them, So South Africa, we were a little bit behind. So hopefully I do believe it could also be a bit of a psychosomatic thing, because our government is saying the venues aren't safe by saying 50% capacity, unfortunately. So hopefully when that's lifted, the public, the hesitancy will also lift. And, they need to get out and support local again. They need to go and support our artists, whether it's a gig down the road at their local pub or a festival or anything. We really, I do impeach the public and appeal to the public to say, please go out and support any kind of entertainment. Because as wonderful as the online entertainment was in COVID, and thank goodness we had technology where we could do online, but it's not the same. There's nothing better than live entertainment and that energy in a venue and hearing the appreciation of an audience. It is so, so vital. So fingers crossed, hopefully by the end of the year, we're producing shows. And obviously, I'll keep you in the loop. We are in discussions for a few possible shows on a smaller scale. But then hopefully in a year, 2 years, we can get back to the size of Gone Too Soon or a Luther Vandross tribute.
Now, Collett, you've been doing this for a very long time. What is the biggest piece of advice you would give someone who's looking at getting into maybe PR or becoming an artist or maybe breaking into the entertainment industry as a whole?
Surround yourself with people who are positive, who are proactive, who have the same outlook. I've got no time for ego. I've got no time for anything toxic and that kind of stuff. So surround yourself with those people who are just as passionate.
I'm actually really glad that you brought up, egos, because I feel like it's one of the things that's actually holding Durban back. Sometimes in Durban, it almost feels like every entity is its own island in a way. As much as there is collaboration, but you'll find that it's amongst people who are in the same social group or, similar groups and such. And it's all about knowing, who you know and such, as opposed to, talent and someone that's actually doing something that's really good. We've literally had people come up on we're starting a podcast and we're a competition. And it's sort of just like, it could have literally, on the other hand, been like, you guys have been doing this since 2016. Are there any pointers that you can give us? More on a collaborative tip than, a competitive one. And I believe that this may be something that is sort of, like a plague within, the entertainment industry as a whole, perhaps from some of the things that you've experienced as well. It's very frustrating.
It's my biggest frustration. I mean, I've been doing it for 30 years and I still have that frustration. And it's definitely the case. I've had that as well, where publicists who've been a publicist for 6 months have even stolen some of my clients, saying that they could do it better, they can do it cheaper, all that kind of stuff. I mean, our industry is hugely cutthroat. And that's what I'm fighting against, because I learned that like, as I say, right from the outset, that we need to benefit each other to benefit the industry.
Facts.
And I learned that from my time in the UK. I especially learned it when I went to LA on a project. I took an artist who was going to release an album, and we were collaborating with music producers and artists in LA. And we sat in Los Angeles around a table of about 12 people. And just seeing how important it is, where like today we help you with your project, tomorrow we help, you help me with mine, kind of vibe. And for me, I think it's vital. And especially now after CoLab, and I've made a commitment to all my, my people, as it were, in 2022. I mean, no one's got budgets. Everyone's battling financially. We need to help each other. So if I can help promote a show at a lesser fee, so be it. I will do it, because it means that we're getting audiences back in the theatre. An artist is releasing a single but can't afford my usual fees, but he's got potential. I'm looking at, and that's my commitment to the industry. We have to help each other. For me, helping you guys with podcast artists. It's not just about my artists needing coverage. It's about you guys getting the support. And that's it. And that's been what I've been fighting against for 30 years in South Africa. Our biggest drawback is we do not collaborate. And, we have to, we need to, and we've got to put egos aside. And it's about how best do we create, or, it's for me, it's all about growing the industry, because we've got to have an industry for artists to want to go into in the future.
Yeah, those are very wise words, Collett. And I really hope that even for the listener, it's not all about competition. We don't have to be competing. We can literally work together for the greater good. Now, we obviously at the end of the show, and I know I keep saying that, but, I can't let this opportunity, just go by, because, you are one of the best, publicists within South Africa and obviously around the world as well. How have you sort of been able to keep this consistent? You've been going for 30 years. There must have been things, in your journey that you came across that made you question why you're doing all this. And I hold consistency as one of the highest, it's the highest value, like consistency is probably the leading sort of thing to have, when it comes to doing something long term. So what is your secret?
There have definitely been moments where I nearly walked away. I nearly walked away from the CoLab Network. I nearly walked away from the industry in general. But again, it goes back to making sure that you're surrounded by the right people and being open to having those conversations. Unfortunately, the drawback of the industry, it's all very superficial. You've got to put on the mask. You've got to be happy and smiling. The whole mantra of the show must go on, obviously, in theatre. And just look at the last few months, Ricky and things like that. It's eye-opening to realize that we've got to actually have conversations with people. And we can't be that little island. And for me, at those darkest days, it's having those people who've got your back. Gugu Fun, interestingly enough, was one of those people. I nearly walked away from the CoLab Network because of something that had happened. And he sat me down and he said, you have more to give this industry. You cannot walk away. And it was that perception of, like, my word, it's not just about me. And it's having those kinds of people around you of when things are going tough. And I mean, it's not great. I had a health scare 3 years ago, and suddenly I had people, who literally went in and saw some of my clients saying, oh, Collette's past it, she's over the hill, and it was a huge eye-opener for me, where people within your circle are actually doing that. And it's that reality that just makes sure the people around you are the right kind of people. And again, it's all about the collaboration. Do it together. At the very least, have an outlet for that pressure, for that uncertainty. For me, it's been the vital thing of keeping me in the industry and keeping me inspired, because it's hard every now and again. It's like, where do you find inspiration from, and for me, it was never about, and when an artist comes to me and he wants to be on the face, he wants to be the next Samsung guy, or he wants to be famous, or he wants to be, the Max Mapanyani billboard on the side of the airport. It's not about the fame for me. It's always been about the product. And you've got to be passionate, whether you're an artist, a singer, whatever you do, it's always been about that passion. And also refusing to work with egos. I mean, I have turned down major names. I had to make that decision. It's taken me longer to get where I am because it's easier to put your name with somebody that's huge and famous. And for me, what always is the thing that helps me make my decision is, am I going to be able to sleep well at night knowing that I'm working on this project? And if it doesn't sit well with me, if it's going to keep me up at night, that's my instinct telling me it's not a project to be part of.
And I really feel like more people, the industry does need a lot more people that think the way that you do, Collett, because I'm looking at your history and just, the people that you've rubbed shoulders with and the things that you've achieved over the last 30 years. I think for some artists, that it's sort of like a green card for them to sort of get consumed by the ego. Now all of a sudden someone is the face of Samsung, next thing they're now too big to be working with just anyone.
It has happened to me as well, and it's also a bitter pill to swallow, where I've developed and nurtured an artist and then suddenly they have exploded and they don't remember where they come from. And for me, it's so important to acknowledge the people that help you get there. And it's not because I need a thank you publicly or things like that, but it's important from a humility perspective from an artist, is remember where you've come from, remember the people who've paved your way, because it is not a solo project, it's never a solo project. It's always a team effort. But it's hurtful sometimes where artists, and I'm thrilled on one hand, I was right to see their potential, but then they explode and then they've forgotten you were the reason why they got all this coverage and things like that. So it's unfortunately, it's the nature of the beast. I'm creating hype. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm creating hype around an artist, and it's up to the artist whether they start believing in that hype or staying true to their talent. And it's tough. It's a tough thing for an artist.
So you'd say the reason you're so humble is because you remember where you come from, or would there be other factors included as well?
Absolutely. I wouldn't be here without every single person who've helped me get here. Sometimes it's a minute little thing. Sometimes it's a major major influencer. For example, Needle International in London. I would never be doing what I'm doing without them. They're still supportive, they still spoil me rotten when I go to London. They take me to their shows. We've kept the relationship. But then it's also the person who went and bought my ticket for a show is just as vital. And I think that is what we're forgetting along the way with us living our lives online. is every single cog in the wheel is vital. It's not just about you. It's not just about your talent or things like that. Everybody who's been part of it has got you where you are.
Very, very insightful. Collett, I cannot thank you enough for joining me on the show. I've learned a lot from you, and I really hope that, many of the things many of the gems that you've dropped, the listeners also able to then take those and apply them, onto their chosen career path, whether they're an artist, whether they want to get into PR or whatever it is that they want to do, because most of, your experiences and things or other values that you've spoken of are things that can be applied in many sort of industries. So I really can't thank you enough for the time that we spent today.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you, for also wanting to, to expose our wonderful talent. You do an incredible job. And I can't do the job that I do without people like you. I need people like you to promote artists. And I do just want to say you work so tirelessly every week. Your podcasts are just wonderful. So thank you. I couldn't do what I do without you.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours, Collett. And obviously the show wouldn't be able to keep going without your contribution and the artists that you bring through. So we're really grateful for that there. And obviously in closing now, for people who want to reach out to you on social media, you can basically send us or give out your social media handles. Obviously you've recently also been hacked, I know, on Instagram, which has been happening to literally everyone. So from what I understand, your brand new Instagram handle is at Collett Dawson SA. So you can basically just give us the rest of your handles. I know that you're available on Facebook and Twitter as well.
The best one would be the CoLab Network on Facebook, and CoLab is with one L, so it's CoLab Network. And then on Twitter, I'm both at Collett Dawson and at CoLab Network. Collett is spelled CoLLETT, and then Dawson is DAWSON. And those are the best ways to find me.
And obviously on Facebook and Instagram, we are at Sludge Underground. And on Twitter, we are at Sludge031. We also have our website, www.sludgeunderground.com, which you can visit to check out all the episodes in various ways that you can support the show and also do some shopping, as we've got our brand new merch line out at the moment. So do check that out. Collett, in closing, I know you promote a lot of artists. So which songs should we sort of play out with and by which artist?
Well, I think the most relevant right now would be Bongi Archie, because we are in talks with future single releases and other exciting projects. So definitely, if you could close out with Excuse Me from Bongi Archie, that would be great.
Great. If you've been listening from the onset and you're still with us, thank you for staying this long and tuning into this episode. I'd like to remind you that our tropical merch collection is up right now on casualsex.store and also obviously on www.sludgeunderground.com. I will also leave the link directly to the store in the description on the show notes. So be sure to check that out and get yourself some nice merch. It's 100% cotton tie-dye t-shirts that are very limited as well. You don't have a lot, so be sure to get one and don't miss out. We're going to be closing out with Excuse Me by Bongi Archie. Until next time, it is bye for now.
So excuse me, may we be friends for this moment? I don't want it to end. 'Cause deep inside, I know I'm falling in love. Yeah. So excuse me, may I be your friend? Have you heard her laugh? Have you heard her sing? All day in my head, all I hear is wedding bells ring. She's always happy, you can see it in her eyes. I just wanna walk to her and ask her if we could. So excuse me, may